Hello and a very warm welcome back to Widowed AF. You're here with me, I'm your host, Rosie Gill-Moss, and I'm always here. But joining me today, I've got Charlotte Cannell. I really thought flannel then because I'm going to play this at some point in this episode, but I said, how do you pronounce your surname? Cannell, like flannel. So now that was stuck in my head, so it's entirely your fault, Charlotte, not mine. Welcome with that glowing introduction. Hi. So, Charlotte, I said to you just before we hit record that I know very little about your story. Literally, all I know is that your fiancé called Craig died following a brain aneurysm 3 years ago. I mean, that's quite a lot to know about you, but I don't know how old you were. I don't know how old he was. I don't know anything else about your circumstance. So I'm learning about you at the same time as recording, which is really lovely. So firstly, welcome. Thank you for coming on. And I guess as is tradition, I'll get you to just start wherever you feel comfortable and tell me a little bit about Craig. Tell me how you guys met, because that's always really lovely to hear.
So I was 16 when I met Craig. So I was very young. He was 21, so slightly older. It was a bit of a taboo at the time, I have to say. Parents weren't super thrilled.
At 17, my boyfriend was 28. My parents found out when we booked a holiday and they saw his date of birth on the passport. We'd managed to hide it from them for about 3 years. So yes, I know all about it.
Yeah. So he was like first love, all that kind of stuff. We met actually working in McDonald's together.
Oh, did you?
Of all places, yeah. And then he kind of went off to uni and did his thing. He went to uni slightly later, but he went, literally we met in the July, he went to uni in the September. So we were long distance from the September until 2016. So we got together in 2010, long distance until 2016, because he did uni, I did uni. And then we moved in together, got a little flat in Essex in 2016, and lived there. We lived in Essex together for about 6 years. So, yeah, we were together about 12 years before he died.
Gosh.
Yeah, quite a long time.
Kind of most of your adult life, actually, so far.
Yeah, like I've properly grown up with him, and he's been such a big influence on me as a person, really, because at that age you're so sort of...
malleable.
Yeah, exactly, and susceptible to kind of, a lot of things I say now, I hear myself thinking, oh, that's Craig coming out. Like, yeah.
John, my life husband, him and Sarah met. He was, I'm going to be in trouble getting this wrong, but I think she was only 18 and he was 20. So they had a very similar dynamic. They grew up together. She went to university and they had a long distance relationship. So having a long distance relationship at such a young age must have been quite challenging for you both. How did you manage things like maintaining a relationship? Well, actually, you didn't say where you guys went to university.
So I was uni at Lincoln and he was in Sheffield. So,
okay.
Yeah, not super far, but it was
far enough.
Far enough. So yeah, I don't think it was ever really a thing. Neither of us were really kind of jealous of each other. We both knew we were growing and doing our own thing. The trust was there. It wasn't. The distance more was not seeing each other. But I mean, I would go down to him on a Friday. I used to go to him a lot more than he came to me. And I'd go. That young love. I'd go. Even if it was just 12 hours. If my trains were 12 hours apart, I would. Just go and make sure we spent that time together. So it was just finding the time together where we could. And we were always messaging, always phoning, although Craig is historic for being terrible on his phone. So that was also another issue.
Or for talking on the phone?
Terrible for just like losing it, not being on it. So like I'd message him and then like 4 hours later I'd get a reply. So that added a layer of challenge to it. But we just made it work. Yeah.
And so you moved in together in Essex. Why Essex?
Because he got a job. No, he got a job in Essex when he was a graduate, and obviously I'm a teacher, so I can pretty much go wherever. So we kind of just went where his job was, really.
So you guys were together for quite a long time. Did you have plans to get married, have children? Was that on your radar?
Yeah, so we were engaged actually when Craig passed away, and we'd got engaged the year before. Children were always on the radar as well, very much so. We nearly sort of hit the go button on children before COVID happened. And then COVID hit and we were just like, oh, now's not the right time. Yeah, let's put a pin in that. And then we got engaged instead. But we were together for 10 years. So he really took his time to pop the question.
I was going to say, dragged his boots a little here.
He really did, yeah. So we had the wedding planned, booked for July 2023. Because it would have been the 22nd of July 23. That's why I remember it. And then, unfortunately, he passed away before we got there. But I have actually taken his surname, so I've changed my name by deed poll.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think I've heard anyone do that before. That's
Yeah.
lovely.
So I am a Mrs. by deed poll and then Cannell by, which is his name. So yeah.
You've got the goosebumps up.
You've moved me.
Oh, well, in that case, I think we probably need to go into the day itself. Obviously, it was sudden. So tell me a
Yes.
little bit about the day. You know, what happened? Normal day?
Yeah, completely normal day. I was at work all day. Craig was actually a local councillor in Essex, so he was a very, very busy man. And it was kind of the norm. I'd come home from work. We'd have, you know, an hour together and then he'd have a meeting or whatever. So it was absolutely normal. Got home, you know, and chatted, as we normally would. Sort of said to him, oh, what's the plan for tonight? He was like, I'm at council. And I was like, okay, no worries. I'd had I remember it was a particularly challenging day at work that day. And I was a bit emotionally wobbly. And he gave me a hug. And the reason why it sticks with me is because, you know, just the things that stick with you is I didn't tell him I loved him before he left. And I always do. And I just was so caught up in my own head that I didn't say that to him. So that does stick with me a little bit. And then he went to council, whatever. I was expecting him back later. And then I remember just getting this knock at the door from one of his fellow councillors. Just came to say that Craig had been taken ill and that I needed to sort of go to the council meeting. Didn't really have an understanding of the severity of the situation at all. So I just was like, okay, sort of tried to grab my stuff. I think I was on the phone to my mum at the time. I was like, I've got to go home. Craig had a couple of health scares previously as well. There'd been a couple of times where he'd end up in hospital and they thought it was like an anxiety related thing. But now I look back, it was probably signs of the aneurysm that we just didn't know because, you know, as people say to me, like, well, they're not signs. And I'm like, well, you don't just go straight to aneurysm. You know, you don't just think, oh, yeah, it's a brain aneurysm.
I do, but that's because I'm widowed and I've got PTSD.
Yeah.
But of course, back then, no.
I would do now, but not then. Like, anyone's got a headache and now I'm like, going to the doctor.
Oh, same. And I'm just saving me doing maths. How old was he at this point?
He was 32.
So he was really, really young.
Yeah,
well.
and I was 27, yeah. So, so obviously I left the house, rushed there, and he'd basically he was having what I would call a seizure when I arrived. And I tried to talk him out of it, but he was just, you know, having a seizure. So they'd already phoned for the paramedics, and the paramedics arrived. They then called for a second ambulance, which was when I went,
oh, shit.
Oh, yeah. I was like, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, it's called widows. It's fuck, you're fine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I was like, oh, this isn't good. So I rang, like, his dad, his mum, my mum, and was like, I need you to come. But bearing in mind, we're in Essex. They're all in Lincolnshire. Actually, Craig's mum lives further away than Lincolnshire. So it was like navigating that while
million miles, I bet it felt like.
That was the worst bit. I remember walking out, watching him being loaded into the ambulance, them saying I wasn't allowed to go into the ambulance with him. I'd got a lift to the council because the councillor had taken me, and then was like, well, how am I going to get to the hospital? Like, how am I going to get from there? Was just stood staring at this ambulance, like uncontrollable, like just like in shock. I don't know what to do. And thankfully, two of like Craig's colleagues, his counsellors, like honestly, they just wrapped me up and were like, right, come on, we're going to take you to the hospital. And they sat with me. And honestly, I've never been more grateful to two people in my life. Like they were absolutely brilliant.
And it's those relatively small things that make such a huge difference, isn't it?
Yeah, and they just stayed with me at the hospital. No, I never will forget that kindness that they showed me. I didn't have a coat, so one of the counsellors gave me a coat, so and they took me to the hospital and they stayed with me until my mum and Craig's dad and people got there. And even then, they went back to my house to check everything was okay. And through the next sort of turbulent few days, like week or so, they were there at every step. So honestly, they were amazing.
Wonderfully.
So that was kind of the start of it. And then, we got to the hospital and they were sort of saying, we need to do scans, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And they were like, we're taking him to resource. And I was like, right, okay, that's not the place where you want to hear that someone's going. And they were trying to keep it very calm. And we're just like, it's just for precautions. It's just, we'll see kind of thing. And then as they did more tests and more things, it sort of transpired that something quite serious had happened. I remember the doctors, and it kind of gets a bit patchy for me, I'm not going to lie, because it very much feels like an out-of-body experience.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, it doesn't really feel like it happened to me. Like, I feel like I almost watched myself back, if that makes sense, when I'm looking through it. So I remember the doctors coming in and kind of explaining to me that, you know, he'd had an aneurysm, and it was I can't remember the name of it now, and I really should, but it's in the moment, I can't remember.
Big medical word, don't worry.
Yeah, it was a bad one. And they kind of basically said the next 24 hours were crucial, and it was make or break. And I just remember looking at this doctor and just saying, is he going to die? And he was like, I can't make you any promises. And at that point, I remember the nurse leaving, and I think I just collapsed to the floor and was just like, I can't do this. I want my mum. Yeah, I want my mum. And then thankfully about an hour later, my mum walked in with Craig's dad. He'd driven down, but then I had to relive telling everybody. So then Craig's mum and then Craig's mum and Craig's sister arrived, and then we had to tell them. And that was like living through it, you know, and every time hearing and seeing people who you love get the same news that you've already had. I wasn't in a great shape at all, but I'd had 2 hours to kind of process it, whereas they were hearing it for the first time. So they transferred him to a specialist hospital, and they kind of said, you know, that's where he needs to be, based on whether they'll accept him or not is kind of where we're going to go going forward. Thankfully, the hospital did accept him. So they transferred him.
What would they have done if they didn't? Like, did they just say no thanks to the ambulance and turn off you go?
If they hadn't, it would have just, I think it would have just been, we'll keep him on the machines until he goes, kind of thing.
Oh, so they didn't literally take him to the door and then say, sorry, I misunderstood that.
No, that's okay. No, sorry. We went to Southend Hospital. We went to resus there. They said he needs specialist care that we can't give him. So we're going to apply to see if we can, I think that's kind of how it works. I don't know, but apply for a space at the specialist hospital. If they think his stats are good enough that they can do something, we'll accept him. If they don't, then, you know, we're not really sure.
So at this point, hope hasn't gone, has it? You've been delivered some pretty devastating news. The person that you love is critically ill, but the fact that they're not saying he is going to die, I mean, they haven't given you a yes or no. We know that doctors don't like to do that anyway. But the fact that this other hospital have then accepted him for further treatment, personally, I'd be thinking, well, this means that he's going to be okay. It means that because they wouldn't waste the resources, you know, because your brain will really try and convince you that everything's going to be okay. Yeah. And was yours doing the same thing?
Exactly the same, yeah. I was like, it's okay. He's going to go to this hospital. Like, Craig was the strongest, most amazing person that I've ever known, and was like, you know, if anyone's got this, he has, you know, he's really got this. So yeah, they transferred him to the hospital, and they wouldn't let us go with him to the new hospital, which was just in the outskirts of London. So we ended up just sort of going home and just trying to switch off from events and just, that was, we just remember going home and having a bath, because that was just my thing that I did when things got really bad. A bath was my space, right? Yeah. My head teacher at the time, she was honestly the best woman in the world. She supported me no end through this, and she was just like, go and have a bath. It'll become your safe space, and just switch off. And that's exactly what I did. So then the next day, I just remember waking up being like, is he alive? You know, like, have we made it through?
Immediately check the phone.
Yeah. So we got a call from the doctor to say that he'd settled in. In fact, I think it was probably, and actually now I think of it, I waited to know he arrived and was fine before I went to bed. Because obviously, that was, I needed that before I could sleep. And then we just, went to bed, woke up next morning, he was still with us. And we went to the hospital to kind of talk about what was going on. And they'd put a drip in his brain. To kind of, there was a lot of pressure, a lot of swelling, and they needed to relieve that. So they'd done that. And I was able to see him, but he was on the ventilator. So he was just, obviously didn't know that I was there. I mean, I say this, I think he knew I was there. I definitely do. There were just, I can't even explain it, but I think he knew I was there. He was still my Craig at this point. He was still there, and the hope was there. And I was like, he's got this. And he spent 12 days in intensive care before he passed away. So it was a huge roller coaster. But I honestly think in some ways, those 12 days were worse than him actually dying, because it was just
limbo.
The limbo was awful. It was one day we thought there was hope and he was going to make it, and we had this great news. And then the next day, something else had gone wrong, and they were just trying to put so many fires out. We actually decided to redecorate my living room.
Why not?
Because it was COVID as well. Like, it wasn't, it was 2020. So it was sort of back end of COVID. We were still allowed to visit him, but it was very infrequently. So it was a few hours a day. They wanted it to be the same person, really. So I had to do a COVID test before I went, so it was mainly me that visited. There wasn't any other members of family who visited. A lot of friends wanted to see him. But I was like, A, he wouldn't want you to see him in that state. And B, like, it's not, I want to, I'm sorry, but
He's mine.
Yeah. So it was kind of, we couldn't go till, later in the evening. And I was like, well, I can't just sit here all day at home, like, thinking the worst. So we actually decided to redecorate the living room because I wanted to do it for ages. And blessing Craig's dad and my mum did most of it. I'm not gonna lie, I just sat there kind of being like, yeah, we'll get this
project management. That's what I like to call that.
So yeah, it was kind of that and the 12 days were just so intense, like I say. So we had a few days where we got good news. I remember going to see him. There was one day where I didn't go and see him because, again, they were trying to keep us at arm's length as much as possible. I know it wasn't in a horrible way. They had a COVID ward next door. They were like, if COVID gets on this ward, we are in big trouble. And Craig wasn't the only patient there. I'm trying to look after, everybody's got a special person on that ward, So I remember going to see him a couple of days later. His ventilator came out. So I went to see him, and he was conscious. He wasn't, talking like you and I are talking. It was very sporadic, half sentences, rambles, talking about, he loved poker. So he used to talk about poker, and then he would talk about something he was doing at work. And then so it would be very sporadic. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know what was going on. But the one thing that was amazing is every single time I went to see him, he knew exactly who I was. Every time, like he couldn't tell you what day of the week it was. I asked him where he was once, and he told me he was in a hotel. And then once he said he was at a police station. I was like, no, neither of those are right, but
Same.
Yeah. But every single time he knew it was me. Every single time I asked him, do you still want to get married? Yes. That would be perfect, was one of the answers I got once. Yeah. So that was wonderful in itself, because at one point he didn't even recognize like his dad, like he wasn't even sure, and I was like, so actually that he recognizes me was just that he's still in there, he's fighting.
And that he wasn't, because you may or may not know that John was in ICU for a month, and this was during bad COVID. So nobody was allowed to go and see him. And I really think that I mean, I know that your outcome wasn't the same, but I do think that I sent shall I start that again? I sent a dictaphone with some recordings of our voices, because I suddenly realised that, they tell you to talk to patients who are in a coma, don't they? And they say they need to hear your voice. And of course, he hadn't heard any of our voices for nearly 4 weeks. So I'm taking some comfort from the fact that you and Craig, that those snatched hours by his bedside must be so precious to you now.
So precious. We had some great moments, yeah.
I am wondering
in the context,
yeah, and that's it. This is it. Everything we talk about, and especially on this show, is kind of within the context of grief, because you can be like, yeah, they had a really good death. You're like, but it's still death.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just wondering, did you sort of have those conversations about the fact that, I mean, I'm guessing not, because he sounds like there was a little bit of delirium going on here.
Yeah, he wasn't aware of how serious the situation was, about where he was, anything like that, really. He wasn't in a mental capacity to talk about it. So I would just go with whatever he was half rambling about, and just, if it was work, I'd have to kind of just pretend that I knew what he was talking about. But I would be like, oh, he'd be telling me like poker hands, and I'd be like, oh, you're playing poker, are you? Like, and just kind of and go with that. I remember one of the best days that we had was probably about 3 days before he died, because it turned very quickly. There was a lot of positive news. There was talk about him coming off of ICU. It was, there was a lot of positivity, and then it was like, it went. So yeah, they asked if I could bring some music in for him, because Craig was very, very intelligent, very restless, and they were saying like he needs stimulating, like he can't do anything, so I remember getting a little iPod shuffle and putting a load of music on there, and I went to visit him, and we just sat and listened to like some of our special songs and just sang and just that was probably the best visit that I had, again in context, but it was just so I'm just so grateful that I got to do that. I know I didn't tell him I loved him before he left for that council meeting, and I regret that
in those 12 days.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I think he wasn't his proper self because he wasn't, it wasn't, everything that happened to his brain. It was him, but it wasn't him. You know what I mean? He couldn't talk properly, couldn't articulate properly. But I know that he knew that I loved him, and we had that magical moment.
I think so. Even the fact that he was able to recognise it was you when you came in, that level of connection, that's something special. And all those years together, but I don't think, even not knowing Craig and having only known you for the duration of this call, I don't think there would have been any doubt in his mind that you loved him.
So, and then after after that kind of happened, we got some lots of good news that basically they tried to give him some food and it wasn't going very well, because he's being fed through a tube, and they thought they'd start him on sort of solid food again. And then they sort of discovered that his bowels had twisted while he'd been laying in bed, and while he'd been under everything that he'd been under for his brain. Obviously, they'd been focusing on his brain, and other things had started to go wrong. So he had to have an operation. I remember being rang to say, because he just kept complaining about his stomach, and I was like, oh, it's just because they've tried to feed you and stuff and that kind of thing. And then they rang and they were like, no, actually there is a little bit of a problem here. We need to do an emergency operation to remove some of his intestine. And I remember that call very well.
Problem then.
Yeah, I remember that call well, because I was in the bath trying to switch off from the world and got this call from an unknown number.
You took your phone in with you. That was your mistake.
And I remember just being like, okay. And she very clearly said, I'm just letting you know that you can't live without your small intestine. So if we need to remove it, we're in trouble. So that was quite scary. And then they rang back a few hours later, and they needed to remove part of his large intestine, but everything else was intact. He was still here. We're all okay again. I'm like, all right, okay. So we've come down from that, we're back on. Mm-hmm. Not, fine, but, that's positive news
in the
at the
right
very least. Yeah, exactly. They were like, he's probably going to have a stoma bag or, whatever for the rest of his life. I'm like, we can deal with that. Okay. It's fine. It's not an issue. He's here. And then basically as the sort of the next 24 hours went on, I remember being called in by the doctor to talk about what was going on. And he was still complaining about this pain in his stomach. And he basically told us that his bowel had twisted so much that it had leaked into his body and he'd contracted sepsis. And I remember the consultant, as soon as they call you into the family room, you know that, it's not good news.
It's like the police knocking at the door. It's the it's the medical equivalent, isn't it?
Yeah. And I just remember, and I still hate the word catastrophic. That was the word that was said, catastrophic. And I was just like, I remember just collapsing on Craig's sister and just crying and screaming and I knew that was when I knew I'd lost. That's when I knew he was going to go. And they were like, there's still a small chance, etc., etc. But I don't know how I can tell you. I just knew that, that he wasn't going to beat this. And then they said he was on a DNR because basically they were doing everything they could to keep his heart going. And all the drugs, because of the way he was, it wasn't like a typical resuscitation, that kind of thing. They would have had to give him drugs. He's already on those drugs to keep his heart going, to keep his blood pressure down because of all the things that were going on in his brain. Because they were so scared of him having a stroke. If he'd have had a stroke, he'd have been gone. His heart, they were worried about his heart because he was on certain blood pressure tablets to make sure he didn't have a stroke, but that was putting a lot of pressure on his heart. So it was just too many fires. His body just couldn't cope with it. But so officially sepsis is his cause of death, but I always say it's the subarachnoid, that's what it is, and something like that, brain aneurysm, because he wouldn't have had the sepsis had he have not had the aneurysm. So it was, I said bye to him that day, and then we had 12 days in intensive care, and then the next thing I knew, he'd gone, and he went in the early hours of the morning. So we got a phone call, you need to get here. I remember leaving the day before when we had that chat with the doctor. I remember just wandering aimlessly around the hospital, didn't know where to be. I remember going, I'm not religious at all. I remember going to the prayer room and praying. I bought crystals to put by the side of his bed, like healing crystals. I just was trying to do anything within my power to keep him here. so he had 3 sisters. One of his sisters was already there, but his other 2 came to visit. His mum and his dad went to visit. I visited. So everyone had seen him sort of, that day and kind of had their time with him. And then we decided to go home because I was just dead on my feet. I was like, I can't. I was torn because I was like, I knew in my heart of hearts that our time was limited, but I didn't think it was going to happen quite as quickly as what it did. So I remember we left. Actually, me, his dad, and 2 of his sisters went from McDonald's. It was really, really nice McDonald's. Actually, it's one of those weird things where we just sat and we laughed.
When you've been in a hospital. But
yeah, and I think he would have loved it. Like that, we just found this little tiny bit of hope in this really horrible, horrible situation. And I remember saying to the doctor before I left, like, I'm an hour and a half away. You ring me. Like, I can be here. Like, I'm not, I don't even know if it was an hour and a half. I think it's about 40 minutes, actually. I don't think it was that far. But time just was so distributed at this point that, I didn't know what we were doing. So, yeah, we left. His sisters live in Kettering, so they went back there. And we went back to my house in Essex. And then we got a phone call in the hours of the morning to say, you need to get here. So we did. And
who drove?
By the time, Craig's dad drove. By the time we'd got there, the doctors pulled us into the office and said, he's gone.
Oh, Mum.
And I just remember just sitting there, like, I just didn't react. It's really weird. Like, I just sat there and just was like, okay. And I couldn't take it in. I couldn't show any emotion about it. And I just was like, I wanted to see him. That was my big thing. I just wanted to see him. And the doctors and the nurses were amazing. They were so good. We went to they put the curtains around him on the ward so he had privacy. And I just sat by him and just held his hand and kissed him and just sat with him. And actually, even though his heart had stopped beating by the time we'd got there, he was still on the ventilator. So technically his time of death went down as when I was by his side. And that brings me a little bit of peace because I remember saying to him in hospital, like, don't you go without me. I've got to be here. I'm gonna hold your hand and we're going to do this together. Like, we've done everything in life. It's me and you.
It must be awful.
And sorry. And the fact, but I think he knew that he'd seen everybody. Everyone had said what they needed to say. I don't know if that's the right term because I don't think you can ever say what you need to say because I'd still have a million things to tell him if you walk through the door now. But you feel like at least I did get that little bit of closure. And we had those moments.
I'm so sorry. This is just horrible because you were almost hit with the double whammy. Because the upside, if you call it that, of being a sudden death widow is often you don't have to deal with the medical jargon. You don't have that prolonged wait, not knowing if they're going to live or die. Your life changed very catastrophically, but it happens very quickly. Well, you had the catastrophic knock at the door. It wasn't the police, but you had that horrible knock at the door to tell you that something bad had happened. And then you had to sit, by your partner's bedside, well, when you could, and not know what on earth was going to happen. And you must have quite a lot of, I suppose, questions, why, what if his bowel hadn't twisted? What if they spotted it early? And I'm going to ask, but I don't even know if you'll know the answer. Were they able to tell you whether, if that hadn't happened, whether he might have survived? I'm just wondering if that haunts you.
I think that, I do think that there was definitely, we're coming in terms of the aneurysm, like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, like he's getting better. Would he have ever been back to the Craig I knew and loved in terms of course, I'd have loved him no matter what, what had happened, and I would have stayed by his side irrelevant. But would he have been back 100% to himself? I don't know. He was paralysed in his legs as well. He didn't get fitting in his legs, so it would have been potentially wheelchair. As much as he was making great progress, he was still delirious, not understanding what's going on. And as a person, the thing that Craig valued the most was his intelligence and his independence and all those kinds of things. And, I think had the sepsis not got him, I think it would have been so hard because the battle in terms of his mental health to kind of get him to come to terms with what had happened to him and how we're going to navigate life going forwards. And I think what I've always kind of stood by is he wouldn't want that for me because, oh my God, he loved me more than anything or I cannot explain how much that man loved me. Like, I was his life and soul. Like, you know, we were just perfect, and he adores me. He would have done anything.
You're killing me today, by the way.
Sorry. He would not want that life for me, because he would know that I would stick by. There's no way, you know, I'm walking away from that. Absolutely not. And, you know, I've heard stories of people who have had to, and I completely understand, you know, everyone's story is different. Everyone needs to do different things for different reasons. But I know that, you know, we would have faced whatever life was now for us together. I know he would never want that for me.
No.
And he would be upset in terms of for himself and the things that he would have to deal with. But I think he would be more upset with how that would have had an effect on my life. For sure.
Sounds bloody lovely.
Oh, yeah, he just, I mean, I know everyone sort of, you know, puts people on a pedestal when they die, but he just was one of a kind, and yeah, such a wonderful person, and that a heart of gold, for sure, which is why he got into the council work and did all that kind of thing. And
I'm guessing that you guys told each other how you felt about each other a lot. The fact that you said, I love you every time you said goodbye. Now, Ben and I were quite like that as well, actually. But we got a 6-month-old baby when he died. And so, you know, romance was quite low down on our list of things to do. And the day before, we'd had such a lovely day, and we'd been so kind of in love. And it's like this double blow, because not only are they dead, but you know you had one of the good ones.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know that I don't wish anybody to, no, I will say nobody. But why them? Why
that
them?
was a real hard thing to come to terms with, was why him? Of all the people in the world, you know, I'm saying there's some very, very nasty people in the world, and, you know, I don't wish death on anybody, but what he was honestly one of the best ones.
Yeah.
He really was. And I just think, but they may say the best ones go early, don't they? But,
well,
yeah.
Yes, but it doesn't really help you, does it? And I sort of hope they meant like 80s, you know, maybe they wouldn't get to 90.
Yeah. I mean, Craig always said he was going to die young, always.
Did he?
Yeah. Really weirdly. Yeah.
So Ben's dad died. I think he was in his mid-60s. I can't remember the exact age. And Ben used to say, I think I'm going to die at 65, let's say 65 for argument's sake. And I'd say to him, don't say that. Like, I don't want to lose you at 65. That's a terrible thought. Bloody hell, what I'd give to have had till 65.
100%. Yeah.
I'm thinking now as well that you were in wedding planning mode at this time, just to sort of add a little kick in those teeth. So did you then have to ring round and cancel venues?
Yeah. Thankfully, my brother did it on my behalf.
Your brother? My brother.
Yeah, honestly, I cannot thank my circle of people enough. Like, they were amazing. So yeah, my brother rang and explained the situation. One company, kind of rightly so, wanted me to contact them because they were like, he could be anybody telling us this. Like, I'm really sorry, but we actually need to hear it from you. So I had to do that one myself. But apart from that, yeah, it was kind of on the sort of, well, it wasn't high priority in terms of, you know, the wedding was still quite a way away. We hadn't done much, but we did have a venue. We had a photographer. We had, you know, makeup artist, hairstylist, all that kind of thing. And I just wanted to get it done, because I think
the last thing you want is an email reminder, you know,
exactly.
your wedding's only so many days away because you've forgotten to cancel. Now, you talked then about your circle, and that is so important. It's so important to have people around you. And your mum and dad were obviously in Lincolnshire, and you've moved back to Lincolnshire now, haven't you? Was that to be closer to family?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the day after Craig died, my mum was like, right, we're going home into Lincolnshire. And I remember being like, I didn't want to leave the house because it was mine and Craig's house. And I was like, I don't know, I think I want to stay here. And mum was like, look, I really think you need to think about this. I think you need to think about where you want to be. And I sort of really came around to her, you know, logic of actually, I think, coming away from that, because otherwise I'm just going to rot in this house. Then I'm not going to ever leave. So, and getting away and just getting some headspace and some clarity. So we left, and I went home, and I obviously was off work for quite a while. So I was in Lincolnshire. He actually died 3 years ago tomorrow.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Brave of you coming on today.
Yeah, well, I just thought it's all going to be fresh, so let's just you know, really go for it.
I'm going to feel like shit anyway. Let's just
so why not just go for it? So he died in November and I went back to work at, just after February half term. So again, this is when my circle is amazing. So my best friend and her husband let me move in with them in Essex because I didn't have family down there, but I knew I needed to be back at work for a little bit of normality. So me and my dog Tilly is obviously a little.
Tilly has made some guest appearances today, hasn't she? She just said, come live with us, because I was like, I can't live in that house on my own for, I knew, I was moving back to Lincolnshire. I knew that this was just keep going, but I wanted to be back at work financially. Mm-hmm. I needed to think about that side of things. So I needed to sort of look at going back to work. So yeah, my best friend and her husband let me move in with them. And they honestly, those two have just been my rocks the whole way through. Like they are so wonderful people. Lived with those guys for 6 months and they helped me move back home, and everything. And that's really kind.
Yeah. And I had a great circle of friends in Essex as well. And there were so many people that I still do, people joke because I'm back there all the time. Like every 3-4 weeks I'm there. It really is a second home to me. And I'm so grateful that I've got that. But
that must have made it quite difficult to move, I'm thinking then, because I know you've got your family up north, and presumably you've got some childhood friends perhaps who are still up there. But if you've built this network in this friendship group, even though you can get back fairly easily, it's still quite a wrench to pull yourself away, I imagine.
Yeah, it was a real tough one, because when I initially made the decision, it was very, this is what I'm doing. There were no questions about it. And then after I'd gone back to work and life had become slightly more normal again, I was kind of actually, do I want to uplift my life and move back? But again, sort of financially, the decisions weren't necessarily made for me. I could have stayed in Essex, but everything would have just been a little bit harder and a little bit tighter, especially the area of the country it being. Mm-hmm. And I really needed my actual family. I felt like and my friends would, like if one of my friends listens to this, they'll say, oh my gosh, Charlotte, you're being such an idiot. But I didn't want to become a burden. I didn't want to be, like at the weekend, what are you doing? Because I can't be on my own. I didn't want to. And whereas with your family, you can be a little bit more like, I'm just looking around because, I can
be a burden on your family. That's what they're for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
I very much get that. And I don't know about you and Craig, but I'm assuming you had lots of couple friends and things like that. And even though people did initially include me and I was invited, I always felt a little bit like a spare part. And it sort of started to drop off a little bit. And don't get me wrong, I've kept some friends, I've made new friends, because that's the other thing I've realised is friendships can be transitional. Sometimes your friends are your friends for a period of your life and then you drift apart. It doesn't mean that they weren't your friends. And I'm blathering on here, but I know that friendship groups and relationship dynamics are really challenging for a lot of widows, because you lose your identity and nobody really quite knows what to do with you.
And I think the thing for me as well was I had a lot of friendship groups with Craig, because we moved down there together. There were a lot of groups where, we weren't necessarily coupley groups, but there were just groups that we formed, because we both were new and we'd made friends. And being with those friends for the first time after he died was really hard. I remember his uni friends who were amazing and still have me as part of the group. Unfortunately, we lost another member of his uni group a couple of years previously, so it was kind of like, we've done this before, which was really tragic and sad, and it was kind of like, here we go again kind of thing, which is horrible. But they were amazing. But I remember the first time we went away for a weekend, that was really hard to be there without him, because as much as they are my friends, they were his friends first, and so there were points like that where I would just be like, actually, I feel so uncomfortable. But it was never obviously because of anybody. It was just it's shitty
it's very much comes from us, like a lot of the time. And sometimes people are shit, but most of the time it comes from our feelings of sort of like an insecurity or instability. I don't know. Instability is probably right, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So presumably you managed to find a job up in Lincolnshire and you were able to work up there and be near. Where in Lincolnshire are you? Lincolnshire?
I'm in Boston.
Oh my God, that's where my family are from.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Seriously, I'll mention their names off mic.
I would probably know them. It's quite a small place.
Yeah, my dad's sister had 8 children. Got 8 aunts. I haven't got 8 aunts. Oh my God. put your batteries back in. I've got 8 cousins and they're all living around the area. So you
Oh,
might know
wow.
one or two of them. Anyway, I digress. So you've moved up to Lincolnshire and you're sort of, rebuilding your life. And the one thing I did notice in your notes, aside from obviously the details about your fiancé, was that you've done a lot of travelling.
Yes.
And I'm always really interested to talk to people. And actually, I'm going to get to this in a minute. Sorry. I'm going to just ask you, the fact that you weren't married, did that mean that you were treated any differently, do you think?
Caused a couple of issues in terms of legally. Nothing, thankfully. Craig's family, wonderful, supportive, couldn't do enough and, were brilliant. So in terms of that side of things, because technically, everything was left to mum and dad, but that was very quickly and easily rectified. The house was quite easy because we'd done that, in terms of if one of us goes, it goes to the other one. So that was quite easy. It was just sort of like a couple of pensions and bits and bobs that just needed sorting out. So that makes sometimes the legality side of it a little bit trickier. I think because we were together for so long, I didn't feel the, you weren't married kind of thing. We'd been together for 11, 12 years, when it happened.
Longer than most marriages.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't, it wasn't like, it didn't sort of was a fresh thing.
Because sometimes I know some of my guests have said that their grief has felt a little bit invalidated just because they didn't have this one certificate to prove that they were in a relationship.
I don't like that I forever have to call him my fiancé.
Just when call him your husband. You took his name anyway.
when I spoke at his funeral, I referred to him as my husband because I was like, for all intents and purposes, he was.
Rewind. So. You spoke at his funeral. Let's hear a little bit more about that.
Well, I knew I was going to because I like to talk. Hence why I decided to come in. And I knew I wanted to say a speech at our wedding, so I felt like it was kind of my opportunity to say what I wanted to say. And I didn't want a rant, each their own. I know some people love that someone else is up there talking about their person because they don't feel like they can. I completely understand that. From my perspective, I didn't want someone that didn't know Craig stood there talking about his life. Actually, all of his family spoke. So his mum spoke, his dad spoke, his sister spoke, and then I spoke at the end. So we kind of did the funeral between us because we wanted it to be a personal send-off for him. And thankfully, 2 of his friends came up with me so that if I needed to bow out, I could. But I got through it. I think, I remember at the wake, because I don't shouldn't really say this, but his wake was absolutely amazing.
Ben's was as well.
Yeah, I think as well because it's like everyone who would have been at the wedding was there, and it was kind of like it was all my close circle, and it just was so nice to see everybody in the same room.
It's really weird, isn't it? Because you end up going, it's so lovely to.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very strange.
Yeah. I remember people at the wake sort of saying, how did you do it? And I was like, well, I think I'm so used to it with my job, just putting that face on and just kind of. I knew I wanted to do it, so I did it. And yeah.
I did at Ben's as well, and much like you, saved the best of last, went after everybody else. And my son spoke, and then I spoke, and then we sat down, and that was it. That was it. They played Rocket Man, and I've done for.
Yeah.
But to this day, and I've reread what I wrote. I sometimes go back and have a look at it because I'm quite proud that I managed to pull it together. It's not very long, but I look at it now and I like to look back on it because I wrote him a letter, think I made some promises. I can't promise to not be okay, but I promised it, And I look at the promises I made him in this letter and I do think, I'm doing that. That broken version of me back then, I've managed to do what I promised and I take some degree of pride in that.
Do you know what? I haven't looked back at mine for a long time, but I did the same. So I did sort of 2 parts to my speech. And in the second part, I basically turned to his coffin and spoke to him and, pretended that nobody else was there. And I did the same and made him promises. And I know that because my biggest thing has always been throughout this whole process is, will he be proud of me? I just want to make him proud. And I think, actually, do you know what? I have and I am.
And there is a sort of obligation almost sometimes that you're still here. You're still in your 30s. You've got a whole lot of life left to live. And almost you kind of owe it to them. We don't always feel up to it, but we kind of feel, I feel personally, that to not live my life to the best of my ability would be a great disservice to Ben because he's not here. He didn't get the chance to do it.
I 100% agree.
That draws us beautifully into my previously mentioned travelling. Tell me about your travels. What prompted that?
So Craig and I always loved to travel. I mean, actually, it's something that sort of came out of me in my sort of later early sort of 20s, really, actually. So one of my best friends, Abby, went traveling around the world for 6 months. And I remember looking at her Instagram stories and whatever, and was like, oh, I fancy a bit of that. Because before then, like, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed a holiday, but I'd never really thought about, going here, there and everywhere. And I'd never really been in a position where that was possible for me, And I said to Craig, right, shall we do it? Shall we go? And before I changed my mind, we booked flights to Thailand and did 4 weeks traveling around Southeast Asia together. This was in 2019, I think. So, yes, we had that amazing time together. And then sort of I kind of got the bug from there, really. And I was like, where are we going? What are we doing? Obviously, once we'd got engaged, it was like, well, traveling's going to have to go on the back burner a little bit, which it did. And then since he's died, it's really become my escape. I just can switch off from the world when I'm traveling, and it just brings me so much peace that I can't explain. I think something like before he died, I'd been to 12 countries. I've now been to 25.
What?
So yeah.
And do you manage to do this because you're a teacher, aren't you? So do you manage to utilise that longer summer holiday?
Yeah,
quite right.
Yeah. It's pretty much the joke with my friends. They're like, well, we'd try and mingle with you, but you're not going to be in the country. So what's the point?
I interviewed a woman called Judy Condy a few months ago now, and she was an older lady, but her children was left home, and her husband, and they've been together since they were very young as well, and obviously he died. And she said at home there was so much pressure on other people's expectations of how you were going to grieve that by going off, she went to Australia. She went for 2 months. I don't need to give you the facts. I realise this. I do apologise. It's my brain. And she said it was so cathartic because there was no expectation. There's nobody looking at you for guidance on how to grieve, because friends and family, you will be the focal point of the grief sort of, compass. And she just said it was incredibly healing. And I thought, God, that sounds wonderful. And after speaking to her and to a couple of other guests who travelled, I went to America by myself just for 5 days.
I saw, yeah.
And it was just so empowering and so freeing. And I do have the, slight inconvenience of 4 children, so I can't be hopping on a plane all the time. But what I want to give them is the gift of travel. So we didn't go away in the summer. We had a week away earlier in the year, but we didn't go abroad in the summer. So we're going away at Christmas.
Nice.
I since Ben died, I struggle to engage with Christmas. I go through
I can't do Christmas at all. Yeah.
And again, that's having kids, I think, because the Christmas tree has to go. The first year, I absolutely wasn't going to have a tree. And then they sort of looked at me with the big eyes. And I ended up, my car was carrying a tree back from the local garden centre, the things you do, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there is something that happens to you when something catastrophic like this happens. And you always don't want to waste your life. You're like, there is so much out there for me to see and for me to enjoy. I'm going to do it. And those experiences are worth more than anything you can buy.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you'd be so proud. I went to Bali on my own for the first time in the summer. So it was my first solo trip. Do you know what? I have to say, unpopular opinion, it's not.
Would you say Thailand is better?
I would say Thailand is better, 100%. Vietnam, I would say better.
That's the other one I'm thinking about, for the next big one.
But yeah, so I did that completely on my own, flew to the other side. I mean, if you'd have met, and the thing is, sorry, I keep speaking in half sentences.
No, it's fine.
If you'd have met Charlotte before Craig died, she didn't do anything by herself. She just relied. She had Craig there since she was 16. I hate ringing people. If I could get Craig to ring somebody, Craig would ring them, and I think he would say, I always knew you had this in you, but you just never, let it out. That's exactly what he would say to me. But yeah, like to go to the other side of the world on my own, not knowing anybody, 2 weeks. I had my first night hotel booked and that was it. And it was just kind of like,
we're going to go
badass. For it. And yeah, and I think that kind of thing has just made me like I think I'm I do speak about myself almost in 2 tenses. It's the before Charlotte and the after Charlotte. And I think, some people in my life that didn't know me pre-Craig, and I think, gosh, would they be friends with me now?
So weird. I had this conversation with my friends. I was like, I don't even know if we got on. I'm so different now to who I was before.
But yeah, but I have obviously a lot of friends stick through me throughout the whole thing. But it's kind of, I think it's interesting. But the travel was just been I can't even put into words. And I'm very lucky that I've got quite a lot of people that are willing to just drop everything and travel with me. So I often end up with a buddy.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
I was like,
most of the time,
next.
yeah. Most of the time someone's like, oh yeah, I'll come along to that.
Yeah.
So, but Barney was the one where I kind of put my foot down and was like, no, I'm gonna do this one on my own. Like I need to navigate this one on my own. And I'm really pleased that I did.
Bloody good on you.
Yeah. And I mean, I've not got any flights booked at the minute, which is very much against my life motto. Yeah. Because my life motto is always have flights booked. So I need to think
Christmas
about my
holidays
next
coming
adventure.
up. Come on, chop.
Yeah. So there'll be some there for sure.
Now, I want to ask you something that might be a bit sensitive. So I'm going to ask it anyway, but you don't have to answer. We talked a little bit about the kind of the future that you guys had planned, the wedding and children. And one of the things I struggled with very much was, although I had my children, and I was very grateful that I had them most of the time, but the future that I and they had been denied, that must be something that is really difficult for you, because it's not only what you've lost, it's what you might have had.
And I think that's what is almost hard. Oh, sorry, Tilly's just decided to get a toy out and stop playing. I'm just going to go take it off her.
Sorry, I'm nearly done with you now.
The thing that
anyway.
makes me laugh is she's the most chill dog in the world. So, like, my friends, if they hear her on this, they'll be like, what? Tilly's so chill. Like, this is so out of character for her.
That she whimpers when you're telling me really difficult things. I think your dog's really into that. Yeah, just a couple of times I've thought I've heard her whimper while you're saying
she's mine and Craig's dog, so we got her together.
Fur baby.
Yeah.
Oh God, how old is she? Dare I ask?
She's 10 in February, so that's the next thing I'm a bit nervous about.
I know. That's like my dog is mine and Ben's dog, Lucy dog, and anyway. Well, perhaps I need a podcast for people whose dogs die, because that would be just so tragic.
Yeah, that would be definitely.
Well, actually, somebody did compare Ben being missing to dog being missing, which was not well received.
Yeah.
So, before Tilly rudely interrupted us, you go back and tell me a little bit about the plans that you had and the idea of not being able to have the family that you were promised. You promised each other that's what you were going to do.
I think that has almost been one of the hardest parts. Is I feel like I've had two lots of grief. I've had to grieve Craig, and I've also had to grieve a future that I no longer have, and it's taken me a really long time I don't even think I've accepted it, to be honest. 3 years in, I've been through a lot of denial. I find it really hard to talk about my grief. I talk about it really nonchalantly, and we'll joke about it and make inappropriate jokes about it sometimes. But when I can open up about it, but it just, I don't know, it's weird. Like, I can't cry anymore. And if I cry, it's a meltdown, or I don't cry. There's not really an in-between. And I think, with this kind of processing, this next bit of grief it's the future. And around the wedding, when we were supposed to have our wedding, it was supposed to be, I feel really bad for my mum and stepdad, because it's their wedding anniversary date. We booked our wedding to be the same day. Oh, so you would have tried
to make it lovely.
Yeah. And it would have been nice, but now it's just a horrible date for me. But yeah, I think around that time was probably one of the worst bits. When we should have got married, I suffered really badly with panic attacks. I was on antidepressants. It was awful. And even now, I keep saying, I don't want children. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing the children thing. I'm happy doing what I'm doing now. And I think, is that just a defense mechanism? Is that because that option's been taken away from me? And I know Craig we always wanted a family together. I'm naturally quite maternal, I think, because of my job and things like that. So I do always think, I think he'd be disappointed. Not disappointed, that's the wrong word. If I didn't have children and it was my own genuine choice, I think he would be fine with that. However, I know, because of how well I know Craig, that if I didn't have children just because he died, he would be cross with me, because
you denied yourself something because of him. Yeah.
I remember being so sad that we didn't have that little piece of me and him, and how, that was, it broke my heart. But at the same time, I think I don't know how you did it, because there were days where I was in no fit state. I wouldn't, even poor Tilly, she got, fed, and that was about it.
Back door opened.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
and
kind of like the kids, actually. Yeah, fed, back door open, off you go for a play.
Yeah. And then trying to support children through their grief as well as yours. I just think that's unimaginable. And I actually think, I'm not grateful we didn't have children, but I'm just pleased I didn't have that added layer.
It's that sort of, again, it's that sort of double-edged sword, because my children are kind of what kept me going, because without them, I don't know how I would have done, if I'm honest. And I've spoken quite openly about this. I had very dark thoughts, but they were, but then they also put an enormous, I hate to use the word burden about my kids, but they do, because you are busy. You're dealing with the normal demands of a baby and toddlers and, get to school runs. So I think it's quite, in a way, it helps you because it's a good distraction. But I think it also can delay your grief because you're so busy worrying about how they are. Like I only really started grieving properly at 5 years, I reckon. I think that's about when I went into therapy, maybe a little bit sooner. And that's when, and also I got sober. So that's the other thing is I drank it, so much that my feelings were just being, I cry, but it was drunk crying, which is a very different form.
It is, yeah, 100%, yeah. Like I say, I'm still not at the point where crying comes easily. And I think that I recognise that in where I am in my journey. But I also look back when he first died, I thought I was fine. I remember when he died, I was like, oh, I'm fine. This is okay. Like, don't know what everyone's worried about. And I look back now and I think, oh Shock. My gosh, yes, I was not fine at all. I was a mess and I just couldn't see it. I was just like, and it's interesting as the journey continues how the growth happens, because I really hate, and actually what someone said to me not long after he died, when they found out he died, they said to me, well, at least he didn't have kids. It's better.
Oh,
I remember being like, I'm going to hit you.
And
that was the worst
that's sort
thing.
of why I asked about the wedding. And because this is often the case, is were you married? Did you have kids? How old were the kids? And if you were married and you had more than one child and they were under a certain age, your widow hierarchy tops up, right? Mm-hmm. So, but in my my personal experience is obviously being widowed with kids. But when I've spoken to also an awful lot of people who didn't have kids, and I think sometimes their grief is not bigger, but it's almost more consuming, because they were the person you shared your space with. It was the two of you. And particularly in your case, when you've been together for so long, they go and you've just got this gap in your life, this enormous man-shaped gap. And I think sometimes that loneliness and that feeling of emptiness that must happen to you guys, I think that must sometimes be worse.
I always say you can't ever describe it, ever. That no one will ever understand that feeling. And even for each widow, it's very different, you know, and people feel it with different things. But that going from, I think the reality for me was, this sounds very self-centered, but I was nobody's priority anymore.
Yeah, I get that.
You know, even my mum, obviously my mum loves me dearly. She's been brilliant. You know, I can't thank my mum enough for everything she's done for me. But, you know, I'm one of three. She's got a husband, you know, she was really there for me. As were my friends and family. I knew suddenly people would drop everything for me, but it's different. It's not the same as having that person who you've built this life with, who knows you inside out and back to front. You know, Craig seen me at my best, my worst, and all in
your
between.
hair when you're sick, and
exactly. You know, and he was the only person really who ever, you know, I've always been slightly more on the anxious side, and he was the only person that ever seemed to get through to me when I was having those moments and those wobbles, and could really just connect with me on another level. And losing that, I mean, my best friend Jess, she's kind of taken on that role, bless her little heart, and she's very good at knocking me, you know, when I need to.
Someone needs to be in charge.
Yeah, definitely. Right, I should have been in charge.
I was very similar. Ben, I was, you know, not codependent, because I don't think that was how we were as a couple, but we, you know, he did certain things, I did certain things. I guess it was kind of gender stereotyped. And it was that realization, and I've literally just written about it in my book, about kind of shit. The buck stops with me. Like, there isn't nobody else is. I mean, yes, much like you, my parents and my friends were incredible. I was so well supported, and I couldn't have done it without their help. But ultimately, they were going to go back and get on with their own lives, and I would be left in the rubble, thinking, "What the fuck have we done?" And
that's what I used to say to Craig's sister. Actually, I used to go.
What fuck's happened?
Yeah, but I used to, you know, quite frequently go around her house, because she's got children. She's got my nieces and nephews. Even though it's Craig's whole family, you know, they're my nieces and nephews. I've known them since they were born. So, and you know, we used to sit together, and she used to say exactly that to me. That, you know, everybody else goes home to their normal. I don't get to do that.
No, your normal's never going to be normal again.
It's never going to be the normal again. And even now, I've found a new normal. But there are, and I think that's the thing that people don't really get, I don't know if I'm generalizing, sort of broadly speaking, is that, I am 3 years in. It doesn't get easier. There's never going to be a day. Yeah, it's different, definitely. But there's never going to be a day where I go, oh, I'm okay with Craig dying. That's never going to happen. There are still things that like make me sick to my stomach. The other day at school, we were doing Egyptians, and they were doing the mummy and taking out all of his organs. And it just took me hospital, Craig, and I remember someone trying to speak to me, and I had to really, like, it's the little things that just, and I'm at the point where I don't want it to be my story. I don't want it to be Charlotte the widow, but also I'm kind of like, it is part of who I am, whether I like that or not. And I've got to accept that, really.
I had a conversation with my eldest. It was Remembrance Day, and I don't know whether that was why body keeping score and all that. But he came and sat with me, and he said he was feeling a bit emotional about Dad, and he said, I felt like this was a really good parenting moment, but it also implies across the board, and it's this idea that you've been given this burden to carry this great weight, which is your grief, and you've got to bring it with you everywhere you go. It's like having this heavy bag of rocks on you, and there's nothing you can do about that. And I think that we talk about acceptance, and I think when you accept that that is part of who you are, it's part of your fibre, your very being is this grief and this sadness, that's when you can allow the sort of joy and happiness back in. And I probably said this a million times because it's something I feel really passionate about, but it's that coexisting. I can be happy and I can be sad, and I am forever changed, but I really don't want this to define who I am. I realise that I have a job talking about being widowed, but I still don't feel like I'm defined by being a widow, and that's sort of what I wanted to do here, was change that stereotype.
Yeah. And I think it's, so changing that stereotype, and it's also kind of accepting the thing that I'm really struggling to accept is I'm probably always going to be a little bit sad.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm quite naturally a positive, upbeat person. And I find it really hard that part of me is always going to be that little bit sad. And I find it really hard to kind of, my brain's just gone off on a different tangent. I forgot what I was going to say.
No, that's fine. Don't worry. And my brain was sort of leaping ahead, and I was thinking, I'm coming up to 7 years, and sometimes I'll send like my new group of friends, my school mum friends. They've never met Ben. They didn't know me before. I've been in Kent, but I've moved to a different part of Kent, and I sometimes found a really cute picture of Ben that I hadn't seen with the boys, and I shared it with them. And I'm like, is this weird? Like, do they mind? And it's 7 years, they never met the man, and I'm now sharing pictures of my dead husband. And I don't know. I think, yes, it is okay, actually. And I think we get so wrapped up in thinking I've got to, not talk about them, or I've got to talk about them only when it's appropriate, or I've got to cry when I talk about them. I can tell you the story of Ben dying in a monotone voice. You would think I didn't give a shit. And sometimes I'll drop a really dark joke, and like I did in the car chat once. And people look at you like you're a monster. But we have changed, and sometimes kind of changing and growing. And what's that phrase? Post-traumatic growth. That's the only way you can recover. You can't go back. How can you possibly go back to the carefree person you were before? I'd had some traumas in my life, but nothing of that magnitude. My entire innocence was blown away at the age of 37. There's no coming back from that.
Yeah, it's completely changed me as a person. I think like you say, there's no coming back from that. I mean, I was in my late 20s when this happened, and it's going to be with me until, and like you say, I've had trauma before, but never trauma like this. And I think my frustration that I have with myself still now is, one, I'm so harsh on myself. Everyone in my life will say I'm my harshest critic because I'm like, I need to be fine. And they're like, you don't need to be fine. And also it's kind of very much that, I've lost that train of thought again. It's gone. I'm sorry. It was like, it's the same thing I was going to say a minute ago. And every time I'm like, that's what I was going to say, it goes just back out again.
I'm so glad it's not just me. Well, I think the one thing, or one of the many things I've learned doing this, is that it's, I'm going to say this gross face, but it is okay to not be okay. And it's also okay to be okay. And some days I will go through the whole day and I won't really think about Ben. And I think, does that mean I've forgotten him? Does that mean he's slipping through my fingers? And, I'm remarried. I live in a completely different place. I have a completely different life than I had with Ben. But then sometimes it'll just hit me. And I was writing something yesterday, and Job was in the office with me, and I just dissolved in sobs, and I'm shaking and crying, the big ugly cry. And it only lasted a few minutes and then it went away again, which is a really nice place to get to where you can just have those little incremental cries. But it never goes. And I think that I wasted so much of my energy and my time trying to run away from it. And it doesn't, you can't run from it. It's like that children's book. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You've got to go through it.
Bear hunt, yeah.
Yeah. Good old bear hunt.
Tell them a picture.
I was going to say, I think, of course, you know that one.
It will, stay there, won't it? And
it will.
I think that's what I'm learning. And I think, hitting the 3-year mark I'm scared about that because he seems so far away and he seems so in my past now. And I think I really don't like that. But I find little ways to keep him there and keep him, like I say, I just say things sometimes. I think, oh gosh, that's so great.
Do you sometimes talk to him out loud?
Yeah, I've talked to him. Yeah. And
final question. And then I keep thinking of good questions to ask.
No, that's okay.
And this is just something I've started asking occasionally because I'm really interested in this. Have you been to see a medium or a spiritualist?
So, do you know what? I haven't. I'm very into that kind of thing. Though. I'm a little bit like hippy-dippy, like spiritualist kind of thing.
I skirt around the edge.
I am scared to because I'm worried that A, what if he doesn't come through?
Mm-hmm.
B, what if he does come through and he says something I don't like? Or C, what if he comes through and then I get like addicted and I want to go and talk to him all the time? So it's something that I do think I will do at some point, but I kind of feel like there will be a very clear, you need to go now, like something. I don't. That sounds very like
Look, if you're believing in spiritualists, then why not signs?
Yeah.
And my mother-in-law has been to see one, and some of the stuff that Ben said through the spiritualist was very, very Ben.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also think, well, it was his mum who knew him better than anybody apart from me. So I'm a bit of a skeptic, but I would love to be proved wrong, and I would love nothing more than to be able to speak to Ben in some way, to tell him I'm okay, to tell him the kids are okay, to tell him I love him. But I've also had to make peace with the fact I'll never get to do that. And I think I keep worrying about opening up those little chasms of hope, which you work so hard to close down when you're grieving. Sorry, Tilly. Am I keeping you from your dinner?
She's had a dinner. I don't know what's the matter with her. So usually she's so chill.
Attention.
Yeah, she's like, I think it's because we're not sat on the sofa watching like Gilmore Girls or something. That's it. That's her issue.
Maths.
I'm not a maths girl. I'm not. No.
Don't say that because I wasn't either. And then all of a sudden this season, I am completely hooked. John's watching it with me. Like I'm saving it. Oh, honestly, it's so tragic. But then it's cold and dark, isn't it? I've got nothing better.
Exactly. You've got to do something to cheer stuff up. So
quite. And their relationships always look worse now. So we're like, it's fine. We're good. All right. Well, Charlotte, it's been absolutely lovely to talk to you. It really has. I think you're an incredible young woman. I think to have gone through what you went through at such a young age and to be able to sit in front of a complete stranger and tell your story, knowing that thousands of people listen, I hope, and to do it so eloquently and to speak about Craig in such a loving way, that has been probably my favourite thing about this episode.
Thank you.
You've had the hairs on my arms going up, loads. It literally shines out of you. And it just breaks my heart that it got cut short. I'm so sorry for your loss. I know it's a pointless platitude, but I am. Thank you. And I think you're doing awesome. I can't wait. In fact, do you follow me on Instagram? If not, do.
I do,
send me a message and I'll follow you back, and then I can admire your travel photos and be a little bit sick to the stomach when you go to my gorgeous. Well, for anybody else out there who has listened today and might be affected by today's episode, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I can, of course, pass messages to Charlotte if anybody would like to. But for now, it's goodbye from me. It's goodbye from Charlotte.
Bye.
Okay. Yeah, you did it. Oh, that's new. I just threw that in today just to shake things up. And for everybody else out there, whatever you're going through, please know that you're not alone and we are here for you if you need us. Lots of love. Goodbye. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you think someone else may benefit from this, please do share. We'd also really appreciate a quick review. It helps more people find the show. Thank you again and see you next time on Widowed AF.